Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twit. This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 119, recorded December 8th, 2014. Breachin' with Seculert. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Mandrill. Mandrill is a scalable, reliable, and secure email infrastructure service trusted by more than 300,000 customers. Sign up at mandrill.com, promo code TWIT, and you'll receive 50,000 free email sends per month for your first 6 months of service. And by PagerDuty. PagerDuty decreases alerting noise for IT operations and developers to ensure that the right engineers are notified at the right time. Increase your uptime and sign up for a 14-day free trial at pagerduty.com/twit. Welcome to Twit, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. And of course, I'm joined by my fabulous co-host, starting with Mr. Bryan Chee, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii. Bryan, it's good to not see you on a boat.
Yes, indeed. But the good news is our brand new remote operated vehicle that's capable of going down somewhere in the range of 6,000 or 7,000 meters has finally had its maiden voyage. So that means instead of having to wait a year or more to get time with Jason from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, we are going to be able to do it ourselves, which means I'm looking at going out to sea again in May.
Fantastic. Can I come along?
There is actually a possibility, as long as you can put up with my snoring.
That's fine. I have earplugs. Now, man, I don't need earplugs for is Mr. Curtis Franklin from Information Week Radio. Curtis, thank you for being back on the show. How are things over on the right coast?
Well, it's cool, and as you can see out the window, it's a bit dark here in Florida, but we're doing well, enjoying the run-up to the holidays and the excitement of interop radio.
Well, gentlemen, we've got an action-packed show, so let's get right to it, starting with the blips. The first one comes from Cisco, who's going after Arista for gross copying of homework. Now, most lawsuits brought by IT companies these days have to do with some form of patent infringement, and that happened last week when Cisco filed a lawsuit against Arista Networks for violating 14 of their patents in the latter's EOS operating system. That in itself isn't really newsworthy, but what is a second complementary lawsuit that claims that Arista didn't just backwards engineer features from Cisco's data center switches, but actually copied word for word sections of Cisco's user manuals, down to the typos. And it's not that Arista was just photocopying Cisco manuals, but their EOS command line interface looks shockingly similar to Cisco's iOS. Looking a little deeper, this is probably just the first round of suit and countersuit between the two IT infrastructure companies, as Cisco is still a little peeved that most of Arista's top brass and talent were former Cisco employees. In fact, 2 of the Arista founders are named as inventors on the technology patents that are now being used to sue Arista.
Well, it's faster broadband, but not so fast. There's a new wave of excitement about G.fast, the broadband technology that promises gigabit speeds over more or less standard telephone lines. For many North American companies looking for an economical way to get high-speed internet to remote offices, it's a tantalizing possibility. Now, we've talked about this before, but the breathless descriptions that some are using tend to gloss over one key factor. It's really fast, but only over very short distances. The fastest gigabit speeds, for example, have only been demonstrated over distances of around 66 meters. Telekom Austria is one of the technology's biggest backers, and it makes sense in a densely populated urban area. In North American markets, though, where broadband cable runs can be measured in miles, G.fast is going to remain yet another reason why affordable branch office broadband from a telco is just a dream.
In this newsworthy item from ABC News, the White House is pushing American schools to teach computer science. In a move to bolster American students into being more useful to the IT industry, the White House is working with 7 of the largest school districts in America to start offering computer science to all their students. In a quote from President Barack Obama, "While no one is born a computer scientist, becoming a computer scientist isn't as scary as it sounds. With a little hard work and a little math and science, anyone can do it." They've gone as far as the president and vice president have gone as far as meeting with about 20 middle school kids for an hour of code to highlight the importance of high-tech education. Here's hoping they don't forget higher education and the current myopia on the touchy-feely portions of computer science and more on marketable skills like embedded systems programming and tighter code. In my opinion, without direct help, the U.S. could potentially lose its leadership in a world of programming.
Well, wireless aficionados, rejoice. 802.11ac is not suffering the same fate as N. Now, when 802.11n was made public with its promise of faster, more reliable, more stable connections, the technology was hindered by its draft N, then pre-N, then final release N that was not compatible with draft N or pre-N releases. The end result was that 802.11n did make it into the market, but with more of a whimper than a bang. With the release of 802.11ac, there were many in the IT community who thought the same fate might befall the new standard, with faster Wave 2 products promising to make the first-gen AC seem slow by 2015. Evidently, that fear was unfounded. 802.11ac adoption in the enterprise has been at least 8 times faster than that of 802.11n. In fact, 802.11ac penetration has doubled every quarter since its release and is now cannibalizing 802.11n sales, with Cisco, Ruckus, and other wireless vendors scoring big AC deployments in government offices, universities, and public Wi-Fi networks, and with both companies offering an upgrade path to Wave 2 products when available, AC seems to be the way of the wireless, at least for now.
Now, is Spark the end of Hadoop? Hadoop, in a very real sense, is the foundation that allowed big data to happen. Now, Spark may be the studs out remodel that takes big data to the next level and kicks Hadoop to the curb. Like Hadoop, Spark comes from Apache. Like Hadoop, Spark lets you analyze data that spans multiple data sets. Unlike Hadoop, Spark lets you build analysis routines around data that's still streaming. That immediacy is the factor that many analysts have been waiting for, and the capability that will see many applications leave Hadoop for Spark. The big deal for many companies is the evolution from historical analysis under Hadoop to predictive analysis under Spark. Stay tuned and start tuning up those resumes for the next wave of big dollar, big data jobs.
In my cloudy crystal ball, I'd like to bring an article from GeekWire. CenturyLink buys Data Garden, cloud disaster recovery company. In a move to make it easier for systems recovery in small to medium-sized businesses, CenturyLink is buying Data Gardens. While the Data Garden team will remain in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, it will report to CenturyLink CTO Jared Ray. All this really means is that Amazon and Rackspace will have some strong competition and overall should reduce the cost of disaster recovery for the SMB market. I personally have been using Amazon Glacier to back up key items from my home NAS, but Data Garden looks like they're going to be directed at the SMB enterprise market. Well, here's hoping they offer encrypted backup in addition to traditional cloud storage, in addition to their off-site virtual data center in the public cloud.
Well, in honor of the holidays, it's beginning to look a lot like Windows. Windows Weekly Mary Jo Foley has reported that there will be a press and analyst event at Microsoft's Redmond campus from January 20th to 21st, where the January technical preview will be made available. The new build is rumored to include features like Continuum, which switches the UI on 2-in-1 laptops depending on whether the screen is attached to the base or not, and Cortana. Reception of the Windows 10 builds has been well received in IT and geek circles, and the rapid pace of the previews gives hope that there will be a consumer preview available for the average Joe looking to try Windows 8 the way it should have been. Well, that's it for the blips. When we come back, we're going to be welcoming into the show special guest Aviv Raff from Seculert, who's going to tell us a little something about breaches and how we protect ourselves from them. But first, let's go ahead and take a moment to thank the first sponsor of the Twiat Riot. Now, these days, the vast majority of attention is given to the latest in social networking, the greatest in messaging, all these different tools that are supposed to help us increase our productivity. But for the enterprise, for real business, for real serious entrepreneurs, there is still, after all these years, nothing more productive, more secure, better than really good email. And that's exactly what Mandrill does. That's why I'm happy that the Twilight Right is supported by a company that's scalable, reliable, and secure. An email infrastructure service that is trusted by more than 300,000 customers. Of course, that's Mandrill. Now, what exactly is Mandrill? It's the easiest way to manage, integrate, deliver, track, and analyze your email. It supports detailed delivery reports, advanced analytics, and a friendly interface that makes it easy for your entire team, from developers to marketers, to monitor and evaluate email performance across your business. You can use Mandrill to send automated one-to-one emails like password resets and welcome messages, or for marketing emails and customized newsletters. Now, Mandrill started as an idea back in 2010, and now they're the largest email-as-a-service platform on the market. Because they've geolocated their servers to maximize response time, Mandrill can deliver your email in milliseconds. And they've given you all the webhooks and analytics that developers need to check delivery rates, and the documentation to make that integration a breeze. Now, speaking of integration, Mandrill is easy to set up and to integrate with your existing apps. It comes with a beautiful interface, flexible template options, custom tagging, and advanced tracking and reports. It's also the only email infrastructure service with a mobile app that lets you monitor delivery and troubleshoot from wherever you are on the go. Mandrill is powerful, scalable, and affordable, but you know what? You don't have to take our word for it. Right now, Mandrill is offering a special deal to the members of the Twit audience. Sign up at mandrill.com, promo code TWIT, and you'll receive 50,000 free email cents per month for your first 6 months of service. That's mandrill.com, promo code TWIT. mandrill.com, promo code TWIT. And we thank Mandrill for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now we welcome to the show Mr. Aviv Raff from Seculert. He's the CTO and the co-founder. Aviv, thank you very much for coming on to This Week in Enterprise Tech.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Aviv, for the folks at home, could you please tell them what is Seculert? We've got a lot of security companies that are up and coming, that are trying to position themselves for the next big boom in security. What is your piece of that sector?
So we're a cloud-based automated breach detection solution. So basically we help our customers detect breaches or basically detect compromised devices before the compromise becomes a breach. And we do that purely in the cloud, meaning no software, no hardware whatsoever need to be deployed.
Right. Aviv, we've seen more and more of this becoming a necessity in the enterprise. This idea that the firewall is dead, the perimeter is dead, that you just have to assume at one point or another your network is going to be breached. This is becoming more and more popular because we've seen breaches at Target, at Home Depot, now it's Sony. Tell me, what is your philosophy here? Because I know that your company specifically tries to look at what's going out of your company so that you can find out where that breach might exist.
Exactly. So most of the traditional security solutions today basically focus on the inbound. So they look at things that come to your network, try to prevent the attack. Now, unfortunately, as we've seen with the recent breaches that have been publicized, this is not effective. So what we do here at Seculert, we basically look at the outbound traffic, try to analyze it and identify if there is anything with malicious intent trying to communicate out, basically trying to communicate with the attackers. And that's basically the weakest link of any attack. At the end, the attacker needs his attack tool to communicate back.
Right. Aviv, one of the questions that has been asked a lot about the latest breach, the Sony breach, which really is earth-shattering. I mean, there's never been anything like this in the enterprise before. Yeah. Is, well, how could they not notice? You've got over 100 terabytes of outbound traffic from servers that are supposed to be secure, and all that data is crossing a gateway somewhere. How is it that a company like Sony, which spends millions and millions a year on IT infrastructure and security, couldn't notice that kind of a breach? And it boggles the mind of novice and expert IT people alike who say, could this be happening elsewhere? I mean, how can you not notice all that outbound traffic?
And that's a great question. And the reason basically is very similar to what happened to Target. At Target, they got alerts, and one of the alerts was the actual malware that was involved in the Target breach. And Target, during our research, we noticed that over 11 gigabytes of data left the Target infrastructure. However, the SOC guys and the incident response guys, couldn't find the actual alert because they were overwhelmed with the amount of alerts coming from, different security solutions, which unfortunately most of them are trying to alert you about things that might have happened instead of things that actually happen within your corporate network. So if you get tens of thousands of alerts or 1,000 of alerts every day, you need to understand and figure out which of them are the real thing, which of them are really a compromise that maybe, maybe in a sense become a breach.
Right. And actually, I think that's something that we have seen a lot in our field, which is information overload. Doesn't matter if you've got the best tools available, if you don't know how to interpret the data, or if there's just too much data coming in, it's very difficult for you to figure out what's going on, especially when, say, the CNC of a malware is obfuscated. Now, I want to go through some of the cases that Seculert has been involved with. Let's talk about the evolution of the DGA, the domain generating algorithms. I know that Seculert actually did a case study with a couple of companies looking specifically at this type of malware. Can you tell me first what it is and how you actually defend against it?
Okay, so DGA, it's not the kind of malware. It's actually a feature within the malware. Any kind of malware can add this feature, and we've seen many different malware families add this to their arsenal. So in a sense, whenever a malware requires to communicate with the command and control server, with the attacker, there are three ways for it to know which command and control server it should communicate. The first one is having the actual command and control servers embedded within the malware. The second is downloading a configuration file where it actually says within the configuration file where to communicate with next. There is actually a list of different command and control servers in case of one is being blocked or being shut down. And the last piece is basically DGA. So instead of having a static list, the attackers, they basically said, okay, if I just create a static list, then someone can just shut down my botnet very easily because they can just block or shut down the different command and control server or domains. So they generated automatically a list of thousands of different domains and tried to communicate with them until some of them will actually respond. So every day you'll see, the malware will generate a different amount of domains and try to communicate with them.
Right. We've actually had a few security experts, both Steve Gibson and Raphael Mudge, come on and show us how obfuscation of command and control communications works. So specifically, you use protocols that you wouldn't consider hostile. You use FTP, you use ping, you use DNS in order to do CNC in a way that people don't realize there's actually something happening inside your network. So that's why it's so difficult to stop. Let me look to a specific example, a recent example of something that did use DGA and use obfuscation. That's the, how do I pronounce it? Regan malware.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so I know that you've done some work with there. What did we learn from that particular piece of malware? Because it was incredibly sophisticated with multiple layers of installs and then a modular payload.
Yeah, this kind of operation is very similar to many different attacks that we like to call advanced persistence threats. So the attacker behind it is highly sophisticated and was able to stay under the radar for a very long time, since 2008. And I think this is what's significant in this attack, that they were actually being able to communicate with the attackers, do whatever they like within the victim's network without anyone else noticing.
Yeah, let's go ahead and break that down a tiny little bit, because Regan was really, I think, the malware that made the case for moving to detection instead of prevention, because all the security experts are coming out saying this is almost impossible to detect 100%. Because it's so modular, because it's so sneaky, because it installs in so many different ways, you're never going to be able to stop all the infection. So you need to be able to detect what it's actually doing. What would be your way of doing it? How would Seculert look at this and say, okay, I'm going to watch your network from the cloud, and I'm going to tell you when you've got this malware active?
So Regan, like other malware, again, have one weak link, which is basically it have to communicate out, to the attackers. So even if they did the most sophisticated way of trying to hide themselves within the PC, within the laptop, or added a rootkit out, whatever sophisticated method, at the end it would have to communicate out. And what we do at Seculert, we'll analyze the traffic that goes from within the corporate network to the internet, and try to look for anomalies within that activity, and try to see if there is anything that looks suspicious, and basically alert back.
Right, Aviv. There's going to be those who say this is fine, this is good and all, but doing it this way, looking at detection rather than prevention, means that some data is probably going to leak out into the world. There's just no way to stop that. I mean, there's no way to detect it unless it's already leaving my network. Is this just the new reality? I mean, are we never going to get back to a time where we think we can stop them before they get into the network?
Unfortunately, it is. You see with today's breaches, looking at Regan being out there since 2008, even if you'll be able to see something within the same day, within 30 days, it's better than 6 years, right?
Exactly. Okay. Now let's switch gears a little bit. Talk about Home Depot, because we seem to be in this time where every single breach becomes the worst breach ever. And before Sony, it was Home Depot / Target. The credit cards that went out, the customer information that went out. This was unthinkable. This was unheard of. But that was slightly different, because that's no longer looking at just how your network is set up. It's now looking at what kind of businesses your business does business with, and whether or not a third party becomes a vector for infection or a vector for data leakage. What did you learn from the Home Depot / Target breaches?
So what we learned there, it's basically that there are so many ways to get infected. You don't need to wait, for someone to get, within your network to a bad website. Even if it takes his laptop, goes outside to Starbucks, he can get infected. Or if your third-party vendor has access to your network and he is infected, he can compromise your network as well.
Right. Okay, so Aviv, let's take this home. I know you're running out of time here, but I do want to give you some opportunity to reach out into the IT, the enterprise community. If you are looking at securing your network today, so of course you do the traditional steps. You make sure you have a good firewall. You make sure definitions are updated. You make sure that your network is compartmentalized, that you have things separated out in the zones so that gaining access to one node of a network won't give you access to everything. But once you've done all those things, and I'm not saying that we have, but I'm saying once you've done all those best practice prevention steps, what are the things you now have to start looking for in 2015 for detection?
So you need to look into things that are automated. So you don't want to add more manual work to a limited amount of stuff that you have. You want to have a tool that can give you answers instead of questions. Maybe you have the best security stuff in-house, or you want to outsource it out, but if they don't know which questions to ask, what type of malware to look for, they will not be able to find the actual compromised devices. So you need to have a tool that gives you answers and instead of more questions. So basically an actionable intelligence.
Aviv, I want to give you one last question here. And I know that this is a little bit of speculation and this is forward-looking. And unfortunately, you won't be around for the discussion of the Sony breach. But in looking at the Sony breach, and I've got to imagine that your company right now is looking through all the data like mad, because this is the new gold standard for defense against such an attack. What are the steps, other than making sure that you've got some sort of suite in play that doesn't overwhelm your current IT staff, to look at extrusion prevention, extrusion detection, that perhaps Sony should be taking now that all of their corporate data is out? Because there's a lot of people who are saying that this is essentially, this is a nail in the coffin for Sony. If they've lost all this data, if they've lost content, creative content, and they're a creative content company, that this could potentially cost them hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars over the next decade or so. Is this the wake-up call to start spending serious money into extrusion detection?
Yes, I definitely agree. And this is not me saying, this is something that was said by the head of RSA back then, who said that today only 80% of the budget is into prevention, and only 20% is into detection and response. I think enterprises now see this breaches and understand they need to move the budget out of prevention into detection and response. And what they need to understand is they need to change their mindset. They need to understand that just having a prevention in mind is not enough.
Aviv Raff, co-founder and CTO of Seculert, thank you very much for joining us here today. Could you please tell our audience, tell the Twilight Right, where they can find out more about you, about your company, about the services, products that you offer?
Sure, just go online, www.seculert.com. That's it.
Fantastic. Well, folks, you've heard it here. If you have any data that you prize, it might be time to put a good extrusion detection system into play. Aviv, thank you. We'll have you back on when you've got more time. We'd love to have you sit down with us with some of our security experts and go over the philosophy of protecting the modern-day enterprise.
Sure, anytime.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, folks, when we come back, we're actually going to be taking some of the knowledge that Aviv just gave us about extrusion detection, about prevention of breaches, and applying it to, the biggest breach of the year, maybe of the millennium. We're talking about Sony. But before that, let's go ahead and take another break to welcome back to the Twilight Right another sponsor. It's PagerDuty. The tech we use in the enterprise gets more and more reliable with each generation. Servers fail over, switches route around outages, and storage has redundancies for redundancies of redundancies. But no matter how sophisticated our tools become, things still break. And they tend to break when you least expect them to. And when it impacts your customers, you want to be woken from your deep sleep to fix it. That's why we've got PagerDuty as part of the Twilight Riot. If you rely on your software and services to always be up, PagerDuty is, well, it's an essential tool. It's the hub of your operation. PagerDuty connects all of your systems into a single view where you can see the critical events happening across all your monitoring tools. There are over 100 ready-to-use integrations, including Nagios, New Relic, Keynote, AppDynamics, or you could roll your own using the PagerDuty APIs. Now, here's how it works. When an incident occurs, PagerDuty first filters and deduplicates events to ensure that only actionable events are delivered. This is important. This is what we're just talking about with Aviv. If you're getting too much data, if it's giving you everything rather than just the most critical events, then your IT staff will be overwhelmed. After decreasing the noise, PagerDuty notifies the right team and member based on on-call schedules and personalized alerting preferences. Now, if alerts are missed, PagerDuty will automatically escalate issues to another team member until it's responded to. Alerts are dispatched by automated phone calls, SMS, email, and push notifications, and PagerDuty is fully distributed across multiple data centers and multiple hosting providers with multiple contact methods, so you'll never miss an alert. All of this means that you can easily resolve incidents on the go so that you can live your life even when you're on call. PagerDuty's analytic tools will also identify common problems, allowing you to proactively make system improvements and prevent future outages. You can customize it to fit how you and your team work, regardless of location or size. PagerDuty is trusted by thousands of companies, including Microsoft, GitHub, Boeing, Nike, Pinterest, and Box. If they trust PagerDuty, well, so should you. Oh, get the right engineer on the right problem at the right time. Visit pagerduty.com/twit to sign up for a free 14-day trial. And for as little as $19 a month, you can increase your uptime with PagerDuty. When you sign up, you'll also be entered for a chance to win a PagerDuty exclusive on-call survival kit. That's pagerduty.com/twit. pagerduty.com/twit. And we thank PagerDuty for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Folks, let's get back to the action. Now that we've had a chance to speak with Aviv from Seculert, let's take that breach prevention philosophy and apply it to what's happening with Sony. And wow, is it a nightmare. We didn't report on this last week because we had a pre-recorded episode for the Thanksgiving break. But I got to tell you, Bryan, let's start with you. Remember last year when we talked about there would be some major breach that would end a corporation. And we all said, yeah, that might happen within 12 months, maybe. We thought perhaps that was Home Depot, perhaps that was Target, but I don't think either of those measure up to Sony.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, funny how our prediction episode was a lot more accurate than we had all thought. I think one of the things that we need to also keep in mind, I just saw another article recently that's speculating about a statement that was sent out by the hackers about how they don't lock their doors and they don't trust their people. Which if I was to read between the lines, it sounds like maybe, just maybe, these folks had inside help. Yeah. And so that's always a big issue. And that's one of the things that, when you're playing with government security, the inside threat is a very, very big deal. And, I'm sorry, Sony, even though, it's, got a lot of American roots, it is, after all, a Japanese company. And keep in mind, Japan still doesn't really value programmers and computer professionals. They put them in the same category as clerical. Just talked to my friend that graduated with a computer science degree at the same time I did, and she's working in Japan, and the best she can get is an admin assistant. So to our Japanese friends, maybe, just maybe, you might want to consider treating your employees better so they don't stab you in the back.
Yeah, actually, that's true. Don't give them a reason to sharpen the knives. That's actually jumping forward, but it's a good jump forward. Curtis, let me throw you in here. We've got that article from Dark Reading, Bryan, down towards the bottom of the segment, that as we're looking through the malware, there are some very peculiar bits of information that are being teased out that, as Bryan said, seem to look at inside job more than massive state-sponsored hack. Now, we know that the security researchers have been poring over information about that breach, and they've discovered a few peculiarities, including that the wiper malware, which are some are calling destroyer, had Sony server names and credentials hard-coded into the software. So it wasn't a piece of malware that went out and looked for servers. They knew the servers' names and IP addresses before they even started the attack. That looks at some serious intimate knowledge of how Sony works. Oh, beyond that, they've also seen 11,000 files that were released that contain all the information for how Sony actually runs its in-house IT department. Again, I don't like speculating too much, but this seems really, really strange, especially how targeted this attack was, to look for the files that would contain the data that is most damaging to Sony. It does kind of tell me that someone had at least a little bit of insider knowledge. What's your take?
Well, I think the first thing that I would caution is that insider information or insider action and state-sponsored activity are not mutually exclusive. So it is entirely possible that there was some state-sponsored, or let's say at the very least, large criminal enterprise-sponsored activity that also had an internal component. And, that speaks to what Bryan said, that when you talk to most security people, they will tell you that the insider threat is, in fact, much more critical than anything that can come purely from outside. As a matter of fact, the reason that spear phishing is so feared is that it provides an outsider group with insider information. To me, the other thing about this that is sort of damaging to the Sony reputation, though, is the sheer scope and scale of the information that was taken before anyone knew what was happening. That speaks to an essential lack of protection in place, such that, of the sort that not only our last guest was talking about, but that most companies now assume should be in place. Let's face it, it's the rarest of companies that will tell you that they assume that their security will keep all attackers out. Most rational people assume that at some point there will be a breach, and therefore they have to have policies and technologies in place to let them know immediately when a breach has occurred. That obviously wasn't the case in Sony's instance.
Right. I remember earlier last year, we were complaining about companies that would sit on notification of a breach. They'd know that they were breached, but they wouldn't tell anybody. I can think of Apple. I can think of Sony, actually, did the same thing. But we're now to the point where a lot of these enterprises have no idea that they're breached until it gets reported on. And that's actually even scarier. Now, let's go back over some of the things that we know about this breach and some of the things that are rumored. We know that on November 24th, the computers on Sony's network went into a wallpaper that locked them out, basically saying that the hack was done by the GOP. That's the Guardians of Peace. Now, there's been anonymous, unconfirmed reports that it involved a state-sponsored North Korean group. It's rumored that this is in retaliation for Sony's upcoming The Interview about Seth Rogen and James Franco as Hollywood types who are recruited to kill North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. That sounds fun. It sounds interesting, but it's something about that doesn't strike just right. It does seem to be a bit more than what you would have in retaliation for a movie. But regardless of that, the impact of the breach is fantastic. Right now, they're looking at about 100 terabytes of data that were stolen. That includes things like completed movies. Annie is now being downloaded. It's not even been released in the theaters. The same thing for The Interview. So entire theatrical releases were stolen off of Sony servers. Passwords and usernames, including some very embarrassing security, personal security foibles at Sony, like putting lists of passwords in unprotected documents, medical histories, personal information for employees, salaries and bonuses, HR files, background checks and termination records, passports and visas, and I think the one that is the biggest hit for Sony, unfilmed scripts for TV shows and movies. I mean, we're talking about a company that is a content company, and if their content is getting out before they want, well, they lose control over messaging and over brand. Cheebert, this is the worst advanced persistent threat we've ever seen. Is it fair to say that?
Yeah, I would say that. The one of the things I put out into the chat room is, this doesn't necessarily need to be a state-sponsored. It doesn't necessarily need to be an inside job. What it does mean is that if people are having things like persistent drives left on their desktops and the desktops are infected, all kinds of little things. There's a saying in the security industry, especially when you start talking about military security. What it takes is the patience to collect the grains of sand. If you're patient enough, pretty soon you have a whole beach. So if someone really had it out for Sony and they had the patience, they probably could have collected a lot of that data. So I wouldn't say it must be an inside job. It just looks like an inside job, but it could also be someone collecting grains of sand.
Right. We've got people in the chat room who are saying, look, it doesn't have to be an inside job. It could just be that Sony's network security was absolutely atrocious. And that is a distinct possibility. Now, Curtis, let me throw it back over to you. some of the additional information we know is that security researchers are saying that the attack was happening at least since July. So it's been running. This malware's been running in the background, collecting information all the way back to halfway through this year. And that's just as far back as they've tracked it now. It could go further. We know that it infected pretty much everything. It infected point-of-sale machines, personal desktops, and, of course, servers. There were 50 servers that were specifically targeted that the attackers knew would contain movie scripts, finished cuts of movies, and a lot of other juicy information. Now, looking at this, looking at what a nightmare this is, because they've only released a couple of gigabytes of the estimated 100 terabytes worth of data that was ill-gotten during the breach. This is something that could stretch on and on and on and on and on for Sony, yes? There's already reports that the password files that were released are being tried, and there are some users, because imagine how big of a corporation Sony is. There are some users who use those passwords elsewhere and are now getting a secondary level of hacks because they didn't change all the credentials across the internet.
Yeah, and just ask the NSA how much fun it is to have information slowly dribble out after a major breach. You know, this is beyond a nightmare. But you know, one thing that this does do is it speaks, I think, to an institutional attitude about security and security technology. You know, let's not forget that Sony was the same company that decided a handful of years ago that it was entirely okay to install a rootkit on their customers' computers in order to be part of the DRM package for some of their software and I believe music. This is a company that has an odd attitude about what is okay and what is permissible when it comes to security that stretches way back and really extends to all of its relationships, whether they're customers or employees or, one has to think, suppliers. Speaking of which, if I'm a Sony supplier, especially one that's tightly coupled into the Sony infrastructure, you better believe that I want to be checking all of my security infrastructure to make sure that I don't have anything on my systems that's now lying in wait. This is the kind of breach that can move horizontally for miles and miles and miles.
Right, yeah. When you look at the sophistication of the malware that was used, it can essentially touch anything that's connected to the network. So if you are a third-party supplier, you now have to assume that anything that touches Sony is dirty. Chee, I want to beat this dead horse because Curtis brings up a good point, and the chat room brings up a good point. Hodor in the chat room brings up a good point, which is I don't like crime and I don't like security breaches, but it's almost as if there's part of me saying it couldn't happen to a nicer company. Sony really shafted the consumers a couple of years back. I remember this was back in, the early 2000s when they rootkitted all of their customers. And they've kind of been unrepentant. Yes, thank you. Let's beat this dead horse. You know, it's almost as if Sony, this is karma. This is galactic karma coming back on Sony and saying, oh, you like rootkits? Guess what? I put a rootkit in your rootkit so you can rootkit while you rootkit. What's your take?
My take is go even further back. You know, a lot of this problem, not only just with Blu-rays, like the chat room saying, but also a lot of the problems with HDCP key exchange on HDMI was driven by Sony. Sony kept saying they don't want anyone able to intercept their content between the Blu-ray player and the thing that's actually displaying it. So you need to go and do encryption keys. I'll tell you right now, the #1 pain in the tuchus for me is HDCP key exchange, because there's never enough keys, or the keys don't expire quick enough, or something like that. And what I end up with is either the blue screen of death or the black screen of death, and got to back up. And even a poor quality HDMI cable can cause the keys to not exchange correctly. So go even further back than Blu-ray, go even further back than Sony's rootkit. Sony has had a very heavy-handed attitude with content to the consumer. And I got to imagine that there's an awful lot of people out there that don't like Sony very much.
Yeah,
Sorry, Sony.
Exactly. Well, I mean, when you've built up a bench of haters, eventually they're going to have their days. Okay, let's get this down to the level of the real. We just had Aviv on, and he told us something that I think we've all taken for granted now, but I think maybe it's our responsibility to push it out to the enterprise. And that is this. In this day and age, heading into 2015, you have to assume that you've been breached. Perimeter defense is now dead. I mean, we kind of hinted at this at the beginning of the year, but would both of you agree that if you are an IT manager, it is now your job, it's now your responsibility to assume that you've got some sort of APT, advanced persistent threat, in your network working right now, and it's now your job to figure out where it is and what it's doing. Is that fair?
Well, I think it's totally fair. And, you know, one of the things I threw out in chat room is, hey, in this day and age, every large organization, corporation, education, doesn't matter. You're using some sort of directory-based authentication system, and you should be using something that's doing some sort of key exchange. So if you're going to pick the low-hanging fruit, let's go pick Active Directory. Now, the cool thing about Active Directory, especially modern versions, is you can move those keys around. You can change the keys without having to change the addresses. So you can set up the trust relationships. And little things, you know, talk about grains of sand. All it takes is one infected laptop, and you can get all those drive pointers that people keep, you know, mapping drives and leaving them there no matter where they are. You should be doing drive mappings through group policy and Active Directory policies so that they are only mapped when you have an appropriate link. So you can actually set up a group policy so that you do not bring up a drive link unless you're on an encrypted VPN of some sort. You know, you can take it farther, but if you're going to shortchange the IT department, you're going to shortchange the security group, you're going to shortchange the data communications group, you're going to have people saying, well, maybe that's good enough. You know, oh, I don't have time to do that. No, I'm sorry. You know, we need to spend more attention to this. Sticking your finger in a leaky dike doesn't work anymore. You have to have a team working on this. So I personally think there are ways of doing it. I think Microsoft and VMware and Citrix and a lot of these major companies need to spend more time on making things like group policy, making things like global policies for server mappings, for server resources and so forth. They need to make it easier to implement. Right now, you know, literally you have to have a full-time team to implement this stuff. And it shouldn't be. There should be things like wizards. There should be auditing tools. What happened? You know, Microsoft, you keep saying you make a secure product. Microsoft, why don't you step up and start putting yourself into the shoes of the consumer and not assume that there's a dedicated team just to do security?
Right. Curtis, let me throw over to you about that, because there is an interesting issue here, and it seems very logical for IT people to say, well, yeah, you're going to have a breach. We have to assume that we've got a breach. We haven't seen any finger pointing from Sony's IT department yet saying, well, we told you this, or we had to spend that. But it would seem to me that the enterprise level, the executive level of any company is going to be very uncomfortable with IT people saying, we just have to assume that some information is going to leak. And that's the only way we're going to detect these advanced persistent threats. That's the only way we're going to be able to stop these pieces of malware that are obfuscating their command and control, that some things are going to get out. Is that something that you think will become commonplace among the executive level of deciders to say, yeah, we 10% of our stuff will leak out every year?
Well, I think that the executives are in an interesting position because there are some of the regulations now in place that essentially require executives to certify that this can't happen at their company. And their enterprises pay some fairly large dollars to security auditors to come in, audit their compliance with policy to make sure that nothing bad can ever happen. Now, the IT people know that there's a great deal of whistling past the graveyard that goes on in this. But from a legal standpoint, there are some real limits. And that's why one of the things we're starting to see are the corporate counsels, the law firms that are employed by the company, not the company's internal counsel, but the company's the external law firms of record. They are hiring security auditors. They are hiring companies to advise on what should be in place, because the communication between those security auditors and those external law firms is privileged, where the communication between the company's internal lawyers and the executives is not. Regulations are turning things into bizarre situations in terms of what can be said, what can't be said, what you can formally assume is going to happen, and what you must pretend cannot happen. The result is that the IT function has to essentially be prepared for something that it has allowed the executives to swear can never happen. That's an odd position to be in, but it's where the confluence of regulations and shareholder law firms have brought us.
Odd position indeed. I think the takeaway is we're probably okay, right? I mean, that's what we should be telling all IT people. Yeah, it's probably not us. We probably not breached. Yes. This is
why you keep a letter of resignation typed, signed, and undated in the top drawer of your desk.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for joining us for this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. I'm sorry, but that is the end of our time. That's right. You've spent another hour listening to the best dang enterprise podcast. That's according to 9 out of 10 breaches and fingers and dikes. I want to thank my panelist, of course, to Aviv for coming on and being with us for his segment. But to my natural co-host, first starting with Mr. Bryan Chee, thank you again for being part of This Week in Enterprise Tech. It is always so much fun to have you. Cheebert, could you please tell the folks where they can find you, what you'll be up to over the next couple of weeks?
Actually, I'm going to be terrorizing the Twit Brick House next week.
Oh, no. Woo! Is this true?
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, actually, that is.
Yeah. And to all of you out in Twitland, come on. Password vaults are cheap. In fact, the one that I like using is called Splash ID, and that sucker's on the Christmas special right now. Woohoo.
Very nice. And Curtis, could you please tell us what's going on at Information Week Radio?
Lots of interesting stuff at Information Week Radio. We've, of course, got Information Week Live every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern, where we have just a roundup of the week's activities in the community there at Information Week. I'm also very pleased about Interop Radio. We started the new season last week. It's Tuesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern on Blog Talk Radio. You can follow me at KG4GWA on Twitter to get the URL for each episode. Got some great stuff, explaining some technology, talking about management techniques. We're talking to a lot of CIOs, CTOs about how they manage the technology and technologists in their group. So we would love to have people come, listen, and chat with us a bit.
Fantastic. Curtis, Cheebert, thanks again, as always, for being part of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now, folks, don't forget that we've actually got a lot of episodes coming up in the next 2 weeks. We've got the two standard episodes, but we're also doing pre-recordings for the holiday break. So you're going to get a whole heaping dosage of enterprise goodness in the next 2 weeks. Check the Twit calendar at twit.tv/cal to find out when we're going to be pre-recording so you don't miss a single bit of the live goodness. Also, don't forget that we do this show live every week. That's right. Just go to live.twit.tv, 2:30 p.m. Pacific time every Monday, and you'll find the pre-show, the post-show, everything that goes into the show, but not into the final edit. Watch us live to get part of that experience that is Twit TV. Speaking of that experience, as long as you're going to be live, why not jump into our chat room at irc.twit.tv, where you will meet some of the coolest members of the Twit TV army. And if you're going to be part of that Twit TV army, you've got to jump to our show page at twit.tv/Twyet. There you will find all of our episodes, our show notes, and of course, the place where you can automatically download every episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech into the device of your choice. Do you want it in your iPhone, your iPad, your Android, tablet, or phone, your laptop, your PC, your Mac, your Windows box, whatever it's going to be, we'll find a way for you to get the content onto the device that you need it to consume it, because that's pretty much what we do. Don't forget that you can find me on my Twitter account. Go ahead and follow me at twitter.com/PadresSJ. If you follow me, you'll get to, see what I do. I post puppy pictures. I post puppy pictures and typically quadcopter pictures. So find out what I do in between episodes of This Week at Enterprise Tech. It's all part of the goodness that is being part of the Twit TV community. I want to thank everyone here who makes this show possible. To Lisa, to Leo, of course, for having our show on their network. And, of course, to Carson, my super producer, and to Cranky Hippo, Mr. Bryan Burnett, my absolutely fabulous TD. Bryan, could you tell the folks at home where they can find you on the Twit TV network?
Sure. I mean, you can find me doing Know-How with you on Thursdays. We've been doing the quadcopter stuff a lot lately, so that's been fun. I also TD all about Android and iPad today, earlier today. Apologies for the show running so late. But if you have a chance, you can follow me on Twitter at cranky_hippo. And actually, I took one of the quads out over the weekend and zip-tied a GoPro to it. Not recommended way of doing it, but it worked this time. Do you have any other hardware that I could borrow, Padre?
I have plenty of hardware. You can't borrow any of it.
Thanks.
Until next time, folks, I'm Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep quiet.